Welcome back to the channel. Today we dive into one of the strangest American mysteries of the 20th century, the disappearance of Bobby Dunbar and the boy who grew up believing he was Bobby, until science rewrote his name. As you watch, ask yourself, what would you recognize first? A face from memory or a fact that hurts? August 23rd, 1912. Swayze Lake, Louisiana. The Dunbar family and friends, 11 people in total, spend a Friday at their cabin. Bobby's parents, Leslie and Percy Dunbar, are there with Bobby's younger brother, Alonzo. The land is heavy with trees and water, more swamp than lake. That morning, Percy leaves for work. 4-year-old Bobby melts down, snaps the strap on his straw hat. Leslie preps fish for a fry. A family friend, Paul Mizzy, plans to shoot garfish at the lake. Bobby loves tagging along with Paul, who calls him Heavy. Leslie allows Bobby to join, along with several other boys. Near lunchtime, the group heads back. Paul lifts Alonzo onto his shoulders and jokes to Bobby, "Get out of the way, Heavy, or I'll run you over." Bobby fires back, "You can't do it. You ain't no bigger than me." Newspapers will later quote those as his last words. When the boys reach camp, Leslie looks up. No Bobby. Panic opens like a trap door. Leslie and Paul call his name through trees and reeds until Leslie collapses into the dirt. 3 men rush up the wagon trail in case Bobby followed his father. On that road, they meet Percy riding back fast, face set, already understanding what it means when a mother screams a child's name that way. By nightfall, searchers fear the worst. They blast the water with dynamite to churn the lake and expose the bottom. A heavy cable with hooks drags the depths. Divers probe coves and weed beds. They pull up one corpse, a deer. They do not find Bobby. Because no body surfaces, the search turns savage. Alligators are cut open. Nothing. On Saturday, about 500 men comb the area. Investigators even test a straw hat with a broken strap, just like Bobby's, to see how long it floats. It bobs for hours. If Bobby drowned, they expect to find that hat somewhere. They do not. The stress breaks Leslie. Most of the family returns home to Opelousas. Paul Mitzi and 2 men stay and keep looking for weeks. Searchers find a single set of small bare footprints leading toward a railroad trestle out of the swamp. If animals did not take Bobby, did a person? Kidnapping theory spreads. August to September 1912. Strangers drift along the train tracks. Some move by boat through the north end of the lake into the bayou. Could one of them carry a boy? Authorities notify New Orleans police, about 130 miles away. Percy travels there himself with 700 printed photographs of Bobby. A detective agency mails postcards with Bobby's picture and description from East Texas to Florida. Description distributed in 1912. Age 4 years, 4 months. Full size for age. Stout, not fat. Large round blue eyes. Light hair. Very fair skin with rosy cheeks. Scar on the left big toe from a burn in infancy. Left big toe somewhat smaller than the right. Wearing blue rompers and a straw hat. No shoes. Opelousas raises a $1,000 reward, a fortune at the time. No questions asked. After more than 8 months with no sign, the city returns the money. 1 week later, a lead explodes. April to May, 1913. A wire from the ladies of Hub in southern Mississippi. An itinerant peddler named William Cantwell Walters travels with a grimy-footed boy who looks like Bobby. Walters fumbles when asked who the child is. His son? His sister's? Witnesses report Walters whipping the child. A citizen committee detains Walters and examines the boy. The locals believe he is Bobby and ask the Dunbars for photos. Percy and Leslie are cautious. They travel to Mississippi. The child has a scar on his left foot and a mole on the neck, just like Bobby. But he will not answer to Bobby, and he recoils when Leslie tries to hold him. Leslie asks to see him again the next day, alone. She washes him. Something in the line of the eyes, the shape of the hands, the feel of her arms full again. Leslie faints and cries out, "Thank God it is my boy." Walters is adamant. That boy is not Bobby Dunbar. He says the child is Bruce Anderson, the illegitimate son of Walter's brother, and a woman named Julia Anderson from Barnesville, North Carolina, who had cared for Walters's aging parents. Julia confirms pieces of this, but not the whole. She says Walters asked to take her son Charles Bruce for a few days to visit his sister in February 1912, and never returned. She did not give him the child permanently. Walters counters in letters to the Dunbars, warning them they will cause his death if they insist the boy is Bobby. "If I lose my life on account of that, the great God will hold you accountable. Remember, in Louisiana, kidnapping is a capital offense." A New Orleans paper arranges for Julia Anderson to travel to Opelousas in May 1913. But she steps into a town that has already celebrated a miracle. The boy rides through the square on a flower-covered fire engine, then into a comfortable home where he gets a pony and a bicycle. When Julia meets him, he does not recognize her, just as he had not recognized Leslie the day before. The difference is social sympathy. Reporters paint Julia as immoral, illiterate, even monstrous. A single mother with children by different men. A woman fate seems eager to punish. They ignore that she has been missing her son for 15 months. A court-appointed arbiter, seeing Julia without a lawyer, money, or allies, rules the child is Bobby Dunbar. Walters is tried for kidnapping, convicted, and sentenced to life. 2 years later, his conviction is overturned on a technicality and he is released. The boy stays with the Dunbars and grows up as Bobby, the man who lived as Bobby, 1930s to 1966. Bobby becomes a teenager, falls for Marjorie, marries in 1935 and has 4 children. He dies in 1966, still believing he is Bobby. The past sits quiet but not settled. The names are set on paper. The questions smoulder. 1999 to early 2000s. In 1999, Bobby's granddaughter, Margaret Dunbar Cutright, inherits a scrapbook. 400-plus clipped articles. A time capsule of praise, scorn, and uncertainty. She notices the contradictions fast. In one article, Leslie recognizes Bobby at once. In another, she says, "I am not quite sure." Early reports say the boy does not look like their son. His eyes seem smaller. Some papers report the boy fails to recognize his father, his mother, even Alonzo. Cutright reads how reporters vilified Julia Anderson and wonders how history's volume knob got turned. Then a cartoon from 1913 chills her. 50 years from now. A bearded grandfather sits with a boy. "Grandpa, do you think we'll ever know for certain what our right name is?" She realizes she is now the grandchild asking that exact question. So the family considers DNA. Bobby Dunbar Jr., the son of the man who lived as Bobby, agrees to test against a male descendant of Alonzo, Bobby's documented brother, to see if the Y chromosome lines match. It's a painful choice. Some relatives say the truth only guarantees loss. The result lands like a hammer. No match. Genetically, the man who lived as Bobby Dunbar is not a Dunbar. The test does not, however, prove he is Bruce Anderson. A direct comparison to Anderson descendants never becomes definitive in the public record, though members of Julia's family are open to it. Even without that second half, the first half is enough to redraw the map. The Dunbars raised someone else's child. Bobby Jr. absorbs it with grace. My intent was to prove we were Dunbars. The results did not turn out that way. I had to readjust my thinking. I would do it again. And there's one more quiet voice. As a teen, Bobby Jr. once asked his father how he knew he was Bobby. His father answered, "I know who I am, and I know who you are, and nothing else makes a difference." It is both true and not. Identity can be love. Identity can also be paperwork, lineage, and a mother left out in the cold. What happened to the boy who disappeared? The DNA settles who the found boy was not. But it does not tell us what happened to the lost one, the real Bobby Dunbar at Swayze Lake. Theory 1. Death by water or animal. Searchers blasted the lake, dragged hooks, cut open alligators. They found no body, clothing, or hat. The straw hat test suggested a hat would float for hours. If Bobby drowned, the hat likely appears. It does not. This theory explains the immediate panic, but struggles with the absence of physical traces. Theory 2. Stranger abduction. The bare footprints toward the trestle, and the number of strangers along the tracks fed this idea. Someone on foot or with a small boat could slip away through the bayou. The timing works. The boys were called back for lunch, and confusion is the ally of a quiet thief. But no confirmed witness ever saw Bobby taken. Theory 3. Walters took both boys. During a 1932 interview, the man raised as Bobby recalls another boy with Walters who fell off a wagon and died, and was buried. That memory may reflect suggestion. Prosecutors in Walters' trial floated the two-boy scenario. Or it could mirror a real event from the road. If Walters had both Bruce and Bobby at some point, why did no one find evidence? And why would Walters parade a stolen child across states for months, drawing attention? Theory 4. Misidentification locked by emotion and bias. Once the town celebrates a miracle, cognitive commitment hardens. Lessie's second encounter. private, tender, becomes the moment a mother allows herself to believe. Meanwhile, Julia, a single working woman with few defenders, faces ridicule, not empathy. In that climate, an arbiter's ruling is almost inevitable. This theory does not answer what happened at the lake. It only explains how the wrong child got a new name. Each theory asks us what we value most: physical evidence, human testimony, or the shape of a story that feels like healing. Two families carry opposite kinds of closure. The Dunbars gain a son, raise him with love, and decades later learn the DNA says he belonged to someone else. Julia Anderson loses a son, fights a town, and dies without holding a scientific proof the nation would respect back then. Was there malice? The record shows certainty, grief, and an environment where moral judgment fell faster on a poor single mother than on a relieved middle-class family. Walters pays with prison time, then walks free by technicality. The boy grows into a good man by all accounts and loves his own children well. A tragedy births an ordinary life, which may be the strangest part of all. A name is both a label and a promise. In the case of Bobby Dunbar, the promise was comfort, and the label turned out to be wrong. The true Bobby's fate remains unsolved. The boy who came home built a life anyway. Your turn. If you were the arbiter in 1913, what would you require before handing down a decision? Which theory makes the most sense to you? Water, abduction, or misidentification born from grief and bias? Should families always open the past with DNA if it risks breaking the stories that carried them? Drop your thoughts and your reasoning in the comments. The story of Bobby Dunbar forces us to question what truth really means. But the next case left me stunned in a very different way. A family tragedy filled with unanswered questions and a mystery that refuses to fade. Let's move to the next story. Christmas Eve 1945. A timber house in Fayetteville, West Virginia, goes up before dawn. 45 minutes later, it's a black skeleton. 5 children never come out. No bodies, no teeth, no bones. Yet the Christmas lights reportedly stayed on as the fire climbed the walls. A telephone line wasn't burned. It was cut. The family ladder vanished, then turned up down an embankment. 2 working trucks refused to start, and the volunteer fire crew, just a short drive away, arrived 7 hours late. This is a story written in smoke, carried by rumours that never died. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants raising 9 of their 10 children in a 2-story frame house outside town. George hauled coal and filled dirt. Jenny ran the home. Fayette County had a tight Italian community, and George, by all accounts, was loudly anti-Mussolini, which won him arguments and enemies. By 10 p.m, the younger kids begged to keep playing with new toys. Jenny said yes, as long as chores were done. Around 12:30 a.m, the phone rang. Jenny answered a wrong number call, hung up, and noticed something odd. The downstairs lights were still on. As she drifted back to sleep, she heard a heavy thump on the roof, then the sound of something rolling. About an hour later, smoke. George smashed a window, cutting his arm, and tried to re-enter. The staircase was already a chimney. He sprinted outside for the ladder. Gone. He ran for the water barrel. Frozen solid. Plan C. Back the business trucks to the house and climb them like scaffolding. Both trucks, fine that day, wouldn't start. All the while, fire chewed the upper rooms. The 6 Sodders who escaped, George, Jenny, and 4 kids, could only watch as the roof failed and the structure folded in roughly 45 minutes. 2 neighbours tried to call the fire department. The operator didn't answer. A 3rd neighbour drove into town to bang on doors. Despite being only a couple miles away, the brigade didn't arrive until about 8 a.m. The chief later said he couldn't drive the truck and had to wait for someone who could. When they raked the ruins that morning, they reported no remains. A cause was declared quickly. Faulty wiring. 5 deaths, certificates issued within the week. But the official story began leaking at the seams almost immediately. First leak, power. If bad wiring sparked the blaze, why did lights stay on in the early stages? Jenny remembered them burning as smoke spread. Second, phones. A repairman later said the telephone line hadn't burned at all. Someone had cut it, 14 feet up the pole, 2 feet out from the wood. Third, access. A bus driver on Route 21 reported seeing people throwing balls of fire towards the Sodder home that night. When the snow melted, 3-year-old Sylvia found a small, hard, dark green rubber object in the brush. George, a World War II-era man who knew his scrapyard from his truck yard, thought it resembled a pineapple-style incendiary. Pair that with Jenny's roof thump and roll at 12:30, and the ignition point starts to look like the roof, not a frayed wire in a wall. No one bagged and tagged that object. But the pattern is coherent. Cut communications, disabled access, potential rooftop ignition. If you think the investigation tightened up from there, it didn't. In the fall before the fire, a life insurance salesman allegedly threatened George after a failed pitch. "Your house will go up in smoke and your children will be destroyed," for what you said about Mussolini. Later, the family's private investigator, C.C. Tinsley, learned that this same salesman sat on the coroner's jury that ruled the blaze accidental. That would be laughable if it weren't official. Then came the minister's rumour. The fire chief had told people he'd found a heart in the ashes, placed it in a dynamite box, and buried it at the site. When pressed to exhume it, the heart was beef liver, unburned. Closure theatre instead of evidence. The Sodders asked the FBI for help. J. Edgar Hoover answered. He'd assist if locals requested it. Locals declined. Case kept local. Mystery kept intact. 4 years on, the Sodders hired DC pathologist Oscar B. Hunter to re-excavate the basement. Among coins and a child's dictionary, searchers recovered 4 lumbar vertebrae. The bones went to the Smithsonian. The report was clinical and damning. The vertebrae came from one individual, likely 16 to 17 years old. They showed no signs of fire, and given the age range, they were unlikely to belong to any missing Sodder child. The eldest was 14. The most probable source, the Smithsonian concluded, was fill dirt, later spread over the site, possibly originating from a cemetery. The bones were returned to the family and have never resurfaced for DNA testing. When science entered the story, it didn't rescue the official account. It undermined it. In the days after the fire, a woman claimed she saw the children in a car as the house still burned. Another, who ran a tourist court 50 miles west, said she served them breakfast the next morning, alongside a car with Florida plates. A hotelier in Charleston recalled 4 of the 5 with 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction. None of those sightings crystallized into proof, but they kept the kidnapping theory breathing. The Sodders put their savings into billboards on Route 16 and Route 60. For nearly 40 years, passers-by saw the children's faces alongside accusations of cover-up and a reward offer. And then, in 1968, a photo arrived for Jenny, postmarked Kentucky. A dark-haired young man scrawled on the back as Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, A90132 or 35. The family sent a PI. He was never heard from again. The thread that looked new snapped like all the others. Recent syntheses from reputable outlets don't uncover brand new forensics, but they reweigh the existing ones with fewer romantic shortcuts. They stress what the Sodders themselves suspected. The fire may have been a diversion. If someone the children knew, a neighbour, a familiar uncle, even a collaborator, appeared at the unlocked front door during the chaos and said, "Come with me, it's not safe," the kids would have followed easily. That scenario explains both the lack of remains and the early sighting claims, without invoking cinematic conspiracies. It also fits the pattern of cut phone, disabled trucks, and a probable roof ignition. These modern retellings keep pointing to one stubborn line. Whenever rigorous science touches this case, cremation temperatures, fire duration, osteology, it refuses the idea that 5 complete skeletons simply vaporized in a brief woodhouse fire. The physics don't bend that way. Theory 1. Accidental electrical fire. All 5 children perished. This is the official line, but it struggles under load. Reported lights stayed on. A telephone line was cut. A ladder was displaced. Trucks simultaneously failed. No remains were recovered, and the only bones found later were not from a Sodder-aged child and showed no fire exposure. Professionals note that even house fires that burn hotter and longer do not erase full skeletons, which is why cremation requires specialized temperatures and still yields bone that must be processed. If this theory is true, it demands an extraordinary coincidence chain and extraordinary fire behavior. Theory 2. Deliberate arson as a kidnapping diversion. This aligns with the cut line, rooftop thump and roll, green rubber object, threats tied to politics, disabled access, early morning sightings, the salesman appearing on the coroner's jury, the chief's planted heart, and the local refusal of FBI help. Weaknesses. No verified contemporaneous documentation showing the children alive after the fire. A decades-long trail of hoaxes and dead ends. Still, it's the only model that makes the physical contradictions sensible without magic fires. Theory 3. Chaotic accidental fire plus opportunistic abduction. A hybrid posits a fast accidental blaze, and amid confusion, someone removes the children. It explains less of the pre-fire sabotage, but answers how neighbours could, in good faith, report seeing the kids elsewhere. It still lacks chain of custody evidence. George died in 1969, Jenny in 1989. Their billboard finally came down, but the empty space along Route 16 felt like a missing wall in a house everyone remembered. Sylvia, the toddler who survived, grew up insisting her siblings did not die in that fire. Her children took the search into the internet era, cataloguing clippings, chasing tips and keeping the caution alive, that officialdom can seal an answer before the facts are cool. What happened on that hillside? If you center the science and the sequence, accident stops sounding like closure and starts sounding like convenience. In a case like this, the most human explanation may be the hardest to prove. Someone took 5 children out of a burning house, and then time did the rest. George died in 1969, Jenny in 1989. Their billboard finally came down, but the empty space along Route 16 felt like a missing wall in a house everyone remembered. Sylvia, the toddler who survived, grew up insisting her siblings did not die in that fire. Her children carried the search into the internet age, digitizing clippings and reposting old photos, keeping the question alive. What happened on that hillside? Some see only a tragic house fire. Others trace the cut line, the sabotaged trucks, the rooftop thump, and believe it was abduction hidden behind smoke. Still others weigh the hybrid theory, a fire mixed with opportunity. Which path do you believe this story followed? Children lost to the fire, children taken into the night, or a truth we still can't name? Share your thoughts and your reasoning in the comments, and if you'd like to join us for more late-night investigations and shared evenings of untold stories, make sure to subscribe and be part of this community. If the last case showed how fragile family bonds can be, this next one feels almost cinematic. A mystery buried in sand, unsolved for decades. The more I learned, the more it unsettled me. Let's turn to the next case. Some mysteries pass quickly, fading into statistics. Others refuse to let go. They linger in the back of your mind, creep into late-night thoughts, and return again and again with questions that never seem to find answers. Tonight, we dive into one of those cases. A story set in a place most people imagine as safe, almost idyllic, Cape Cod. Yet in the summer of 1974, its dunes became the stage for one of the most haunting unsolved murders in American history. A body left in the sand. A crime scene that seemed both brutal and carefully arranged. A victim who remains without a name, even decades later. This is the mystery of the Lady of the Dunes. Cape Cod stretches into the Atlantic like a hook. Its small towns, lighthouses, and dunes paint the picture of a postcard New England summer. Provincetown, at the very tip, is known for its art scene, fishing heritage, and a lively community that swells with tourists every summer. Bright houses line narrow streets, and the beaches draw both families and wanderers. But beyond the crowded boardwalks, the dunes expand into wide, almost empty spaces. Scrub pines bend against ocean winds, and silence dominates once you step off the beaten path. That silence is beautiful, but it's also isolating. In the 1970s, before today's surveillance and cell phones, it meant whole areas could stay unobserved for days, even weeks. And it was in this landscape, in July 1974, that the Lady of the Dunes was found. On July 26, 1974, 12-year-old Leslie Metcalf was walking home from Race Point Beach with her family. The afternoon was calm, the kind of Cape summer day that feels endless. A local dog trailed the group, weaving between them, restless and curious. At one point, the dog bolted ahead, barking furiously. Leslie ran after it through the sand and scrub. Just a mile east of the ranger station, she came across something she could never have expected. A human body, lying in the dunes. The woman was already decomposing. She was naked, placed on one side of a beach towel. Under her head rested a folded pair of jeans and a blue bandana. It looked, at first glance, like a scene of someone who had come to sunbathe. But the reality was much darker. The medical examiner noted she was about 5 feet 6.5 inches tall, around 145 pounds, and somewhere between 20 and 40 years old. She had been dead for at least 10 days. If fingerprints weren't possible, maybe dental work could help. The woman had extensive, expensive dentistry, unusual for the time. Experts described it as New York style. The work was distinctive enough that another dentist might have recognized it. So police launched a rare and ambitious effort. Details of her dental work were sent to every dentist in Massachusetts, published in dental journals, and shared with the FBI and Interpol. Yet no one came forward. Not a single match. How could someone with such expensive dental care vanish without anyone noticing? Over the years, the case refused to fade. The body was exhumed 3 times. In 1980, to take blood samples and create a facial reconstruction from the skull. In 2000, when a bone fragment was removed to test a possible lead. And in 2013, when improved DNA testing offered new hope. Despite each effort, no match was ever found. Decades later, the case caught the eye of Joe Hill, author and son of Stephen King. While watching a screening of Spielberg's Jaws, filmed in Cape Cod in the summer of 1974, Hill noticed something chilling. In one scene, an extra in the background wore jeans and a blue bandana, the same clothing found with the Lady of the Dunes. Could this have been her? Could she have been a visitor, drawn in by the excitement of a movie set, appearing on film just weeks before her death? Universal Studios couldn't confirm. Records of extras from that production were never kept, and the casting director had passed away. Hill himself admitted it might just be coincidence, but said, if nothing else, it's a good ghost story. Another theory reached into Boston's underworld. James Whitey Bulger, the notorious mob boss later convicted of multiple murders, was said to have been in Provincetown at the time. As the years passed, the Lady of the Dunes became a magnet for confessions, many of them worthless. Among the most infamous was Haddon Clark, a convicted murderer serving 70 years for the killings of 2 women. Clark claimed that while living with his grandfather on Cape Cod in 1974, he lured a woman into the dunes. He said he struck her with a surf casting rod, retrieved a saw from his truck, and removed her hands. In a detail designed to horrify, he boasted of using some of her fingers as bait for fishing before burying the rest. On the surface, it sounded grotesquely plausible. But there was a problem. Much of what Clark described had already been printed in newspapers. He was recycling published details and twisting them into a personal performance. Investigators who looked deeper found no independent evidence tying him to Provincetown in 1974. Clark also had a record of false confessions. He had claimed responsibility for murders later proven unrelated. Forensic psychologists noted that some serial killers seek credit for crimes they never committed, as if their own violence isn't enough without adding extra infamy. Question for you. How should investigators treat confessions like these? Should every claim be tested, however thin? Or should known liars like Clark be dismissed outright? Not all theories were so easily dismissed. One of the most compelling centered on Rory Jean Kessinger, a 25-year-old woman with a violent record. She had been arrested for bank robbery, and while awaiting trial, she allegedly tried to shoot a police officer with his own gun inside a hospital. In July 1974, just weeks before the Lady of the Dunes was discovered, Rory Jean escaped from Plymouth County Jail, directly across the bay from Provincetown. Her breakout sounded like something out of Pulp Fiction. Someone smuggled in a hacksaw blade. She sawed through her cell, tied together bedsheets, rappelled out a window, and slid. Over the years, weaker leads also crowded the investigation. In the 1980s, a psychic told Chief Jimmy Meads that the victim was a Canadian nurse named Marilyn O'Leary. Around the same time, another person reported a missing American nurse by the same name. For a brief moment, it looked like a real lead, but police tracked down Marilyn O'Leary, alive and well. The psychic's claim dissolved. Cases like this highlight the problem of noise in unsolved investigations. Every dead end consumes time, money, and hope. And the Lady of the Dunes became a magnet for exactly this kind of noise. Do you think psychic testimony should ever influence a case? Or should it be ignored entirely, no matter how desperate the search becomes? Despite the dead ends, not all was lost. Thanks to multiple exhumations, authorities still hold a surprising amount of physical evidence. The skull, ribs, the left and right scapula, a tissue sample from her leg and hair. For a 1974 outdoor homicide, this preservation is remarkable. It means that as forensic science advances, the Lady of the Dunes is not lost to history. She remains testable, her DNA a living thread connecting past to present. The most promising path today lies in genetic genealogy. If you followed the capture of the Golden State Killer, you know the technique. Upload an unknown profile to genealogy databases, find partial matches with distant relatives, build family trees, and trace the branches back to a name. This method solved crimes decades old, long after traditional police work had failed. And it could work here too. Authorities have already consulted with California DAs who helped crack the Golden State Killer case. The hope is that the same approach might finally give the Lady of the Dunes her name. Of course, this depends on privacy laws, consent, and whether any of her relatives have submitted DNA to consumer databases. But it's a path forward. And so, the mystery remains. Was she a tourist who wandered into danger? A woman tied to organised crime? Or someone who brushed against Hollywood for a fleeting moment before vanishing into legend? What do you think? Was there something missing from that elevator footage in Jaws? An extra whose face matches a composite sketch? Could the video itself have been edited, hiding a third figure just out of frame? Share your theories in the comments below. Do you believe the Lady of the Dunes will finally be identified through DNA? Or will this remain a story that Cape Cod carries forever? That case has haunted investigators for years. But the next one. I remember the first time I saw the footage, and it stayed with me for days. This is a story that shocked the entire world. Let's continue. This is the mystery of Elisa Lam. In late January 2013, 21-year-old Elisa Lam left Vancouver, Canada, for what she called her West Coast trip. She was the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong, a student at the University of British Columbia, and someone who chronicled her thoughts and struggles with remarkable honesty online. On her Tumblr blog, Nouvelle Nouveau, Elisa often wrote about fashion, books, her favourite bands, but also about her battle with depression and bipolar disorder. In one entry, she admitted, "You're always haunted by the idea that you're wasting your life." For many of her followers, she seemed like a young woman searching for her place in the world, fighting to balance vulnerability and independence. Her itinerary was modest: San Diego, Los Angeles, then north towards Santa Cruz. She travelled by bus and train, carrying her belongings in 2 heavy bags. To her parents, she promised she would call every single day. When Elisa reached Los Angeles, she checked into the Cecil Hotel, just east of downtown. The decision seemed ordinary for a budget traveller, but the Cecil was no ordinary hotel. Built in 1924 as a glamorous destination for tourists and business travellers, the Great Depression changed its trajectory. By the 1960s, it had become surrounded by Skid Row, a neighbourhood with one of the largest homeless populations in the United States. Violence, drugs, and desperation seeped into its walls. The Cecil carried an infamous reputation. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, stayed there in the mid-1980s while terrorizing Los Angeles. Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger also lodged there in the 1990s. Locals called it the Suicide Hotel, after numerous deaths on the property. Journalist Angelo Marcos once described the place as a structure that seemed to swallow tragedy whole, spitting it back into the headlines every few years. Elisa checked into a shared room on the 5th floor. Within 2 days, her roommates asked to be moved. They complained that Elisa behaved strangely. She left cryptic notes on their beds that read, "Go home" or "Stay away." She sometimes locked them out and demanded a password for re-entry. The staff eventually gave her a room of her own. Still, she phoned her parents daily. That routine ended abruptly on January 31st, the day she was scheduled to check out and travel to Santa Cruz. When her parents received no call, they immediately contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. Police searched the hotel, including Elisa's room. Her laptop, clothing, wallet, and medications were all there. Search dogs combed the building, even reaching the rooftop. They detected her scent but lost the trail. With no evidence of foul play and no body, investigators released her photo to the media, appealing to the public for help. 2 weeks later, on February 13th, LAPD made a fateful decision. They released a short surveillance clip taken from one of the hotel's elevators. The video was 2 minutes and 26 seconds long. It began with Elisa stepping into the elevator, pressing several buttons and waiting. The doors did not close. She stepped out cautiously, looked down the hall, then retreated inside. Her movements became increasingly erratic. She pressed more buttons, at one point nearly all of them. She peered out again, darted back in, then hid against the control panel. Her hands made wide, unusual gestures, twisting and floating as though she were speaking to someone unseen. Finally, she walked out of frame. The elevator doors closed only after she was gone. The footage went viral almost immediately. On Reddit, users debated whether the video had been edited. One commenter wrote, "About 54 to 55 seconds appear to be missing, and the timestamp is blurred out, like someone wanted to hide what happened in the hallway." Others suggested she was speaking to another person who had been cropped from the frame. Still others saw in her movements signs of psychosis. "Psychomotor agitation," wrote one true crime blogger. Purposeless movements of the hands and arms, often seen in manic episodes. But more sinister theories took hold as well. Some believed Elisa was playing the so-called elevator game, a South Korean urban legend in which a rider presses buttons in a sequence to open a door to another dimension. Others insisted she was stalked by a killer or possessed by a demonic force. The video's eerie quality, combined with the Cecil's grim reputation, proved irresistible to internet sleuths. While speculation mounted online, guests at the Cecil began complaining of problems with the water. The pressure was low, they said. The taste was strange. Some described the water as black and foul-smelling. On the morning of February 19th, a maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez climbed to the roof to inspect the tanks. Inside one of the 4 1,000-gallon water containers, he discovered Elisa Lam's body floating face up, naked, with her clothes drifting nearby. The autopsy report, released on February 21st, concluded that Elisa died by accidental drowning. The coroner found no evidence of physical assault, sexual trauma, or suicide. Toxicology results revealed only her prescribed medications, but at subtherapeutic levels, suggesting she had not been taking them as directed. That detail fueled the official conclusion. She experienced a psychotic episode related to her bipolar disorder, climbed into the tank, and drowned. The news horrified the public. For nearly 3 weeks, guests had been drinking and bathing in contaminated water. Television crews swarmed the hotel. Investigators reconstructed how she might have reached the rooftop. Though doors were locked and alarmed, the fire escape provided access. Police dogs had in fact traced her scent to a window that led directly to it. When Lopez discovered her, the tank's hatch was open, not sealed, countering the viral claim that she could not have entered alone. For law enforcement, the case was closed. There was no evidence of homicide, no suspects, no signs of conspiracy. Yet doubts remained. Forensic pathologists questioned details of the autopsy. Some noted rectal prolapse and subcutaneous bleeding that might indicate sexual assault, though others argued these were consistent with decomposition in water. The edited appearance of the elevator video, the blurred timestamp, the missing frames, fueled suspicion that police withheld evidence. The public imagination filled the void. Vanity Fair described the case as a perfect storm of tragedy, internet myth, and the dark gravity of the Cecil Hotel. On forums, one user summarized the fascination. It feels like a ghost story, but with a real human at the center. Her parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the hotel, arguing that the roof and tanks should have been more secure. A judge dismissed the suit in 2015, ruling that the risk of entering the tanks was not reasonably foreseeable. Elisa's story did not fade. Netflix released a 4-part documentary in 2021, Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, reigniting debate. Viewers questioned whether web sleuths had exploited her tragedy, turning grief into spectacle. Her Tumblr blog, still preserved, gave the internet a haunting reminder of her voice. Personal quotes, reflections, photographs. One post simply read, "You're always caught between trying to live your life and trying to document it." In the end, the official record says Elisa Lam died by accident. But the unresolved questions, the strange video, the missing seconds, the eerie history of the hotel, ensure her case lives on as one of the most haunting mysteries of the digital age. We may never know the full truth of what happened to Elisa Lam. But I want to hear from you. Do you think the elevator video shows everything? Or was a crucial piece cut out? Could there have been a third person in that hallway, just outside the frame? Let me know in the comments. If the last case unsettled you, the next one is even harder to process. A crime so senseless, so brutal, it left an entire community searching for answers. Let's move to the final story. Well, today I want to take you to Frankfurt, Germany, in the spring of 1998. At first glance, it was just a normal city. Commuters rushing through the train stations, children walking home from school, the hum of daily life. You know, nothing that would make you think this place was about to become the backdrop to one of its darkest, unsolved crimes. And actually, it's here that the story of 13-year-old Tristan Brübach begins. I will never be able to understand how a young boy could be murdered in broad daylight, in a park where other children witnessed it. No, murdered isn't even the right word. He was butchered. His throat was slit from ear to ear, cut so deeply that his spine was exposed. His body was further mutilated, tissue taken from his thighs and his genitals, and those parts were never recovered. Numerous people saw the man responsible. A police sketch was circulated across Europe and beyond, and yet, more than 2 decades later, the person who committed this atrocity has never been caught. This is the case of Tristan Brübach. He was just 13 years old when he was murdered in Frankfurt, Germany, in March 1998. And honestly, it remains one of the most brutal and baffling unsolved crimes in modern European history. Before we look at what happened that spring day, it's important to remember who Tristan was. His life was marked by hardship even before his death. Born in 1984, he lost his mother when he was just 10 years old. He lived with his father, who struggled with depression, and social workers often describe Tristan as a boy forced to grow up too quickly. Yet those who knew him remember him as kind, resilient, and curious. He loved animals. He dreamed of working outdoors one day as a gardener, and he often wandered the parks and riverbanks around Höchst, the Frankfurt district where he lived. On March 26, 1998, Tristan attended school as usual. That morning he told classmates he wasn't feeling well and mentioned having a doctor's appointment, though no such appointment existed. Around noon he left school early, carrying his backpack, and walked toward the nearby Liederbach tunnel, an underpass beneath the railway tracks, a place that local children sometimes used as a shortcut. It was a familiar path for him. Later that afternoon, people remembered seeing him. Some said he was speaking with a man in his 20s or 30s, tall, with long dark hair, carrying a sports bag. Others recalled a figure matching that description sitting calmly on a park bench after the crime, as though nothing had happened. Then came the discovery. At around 3:30 p.m., 3 schoolchildren entered the tunnel and found Tristan's body. What they saw was so disturbing that it traumatized them for years. Police later described the scene in stark, clinical terms. Tristan's throat had been cut so deeply that his spine was exposed. Flesh had been removed from his thighs and buttocks. His genitals were taken. These parts of his body have never been recovered. Investigators believe the killer carried them away in a bag. This was not the kind of violence associated with random attacks. The investigation began immediately. Witnesses provided descriptions, and within days a composite sketch of the suspect was released. The man was described as about 6 feet tall, long-haired, unshaven, carrying a sports bag. The sketch was circulated widely, even internationally. Thousands of tips were logged, yet none led to an arrest. The autopsy confirmed what police already suspected. The cuts were controlled, deliberate. This was not a frenzied act, but one carried out with chilling precision. Forensic experts noted that the mutilations looked almost surgical. And still, the killer left behind no identifiable fingerprints, no usable DNA, nothing conclusive that tied anyone to the scene. In the years that followed, investigators were haunted not just by what they found, but by everything that remained unanswered. The most significant piece of physical evidence was a fragment of a fingerprint left in Tristan's blood, pressed onto the cover of his German textbook. It was digitally processed and compared against databases in more than 70 countries. No match was ever found. In 2002, Frankfurt police organized one of the largest mass fingerprint screenings in German history. More than 14,000 men voluntarily submitted samples. Even the 54 who refused, labelled conscientious objectors, were tracked down through other means. Investigators also checked more than 800 men who had moved away from the area after 1998. Once again, not a single match. There was also a trace of DNA, but it was too limited. There simply weren't enough genetic markers to build a usable profile. From the very first days, the investigation was enormous. Between 100 and 150 detectives worked the case. They drained the stream near the tunnel, used tracking dogs, metal detectors and probes. None of it produced meaningful results. The search didn't stop there. Police expanded their inquiries across borders. They questioned psychiatric patients, former inmates, even war criminals from the Balkans, and members of the French Foreign Legion. They compared Tristan's murder with other disturbing crimes, including the cannibal of Rothenburg, the case of Johanna Bonehacker, and Tobias Dreher. They worked alongside Europol and FBI experts in Virginia, yet nowhere in the world had anyone seen an injury pattern like this before. By 2006, investigators reviewed the files again. Witness accounts aligned around the image of a man with a ponytail and a scarred upper lip, the kind of scar left by cleft palate surgery. A new composite sketch was released on national television programs like Aktenzeichen XY Ungelöst and Spiegel TV. Many viewers called in, insisting they had seen the man. Still, no arrest was ever made. Even medical avenues were closed off. Investigators hoped to compare surgical records, but strict data protection laws made access impossible. Over time, the file grew thicker. More than 23,000 tips have been logged, filling some 400 case files. And still, police emphasize, the case remains open. In Germany, murder has no statute of limitations, which means, if new evidence appears, the search for Tristan's killer will begin again. With no answers, theories multiplied. Some investigators believed the crime was sexually motivated. Others speculated about organ trafficking, though experts said the injuries did not support that theory. A few suggested occult rituals, but there was no real evidence for that either. What remained was only the brutality itself. Undeniable. Unexplained. And then came a disturbing revelation. In the weeks before his death, Tristan had told friends and even his school counselor that he felt he was being followed. He described a man who had been watching him, though he didn't know who it was. Authorities later considered this detail chilling in hindsight. Was his murder the culmination of stalking that had gone unnoticed? Over the years, police pursued countless leads. At one point, they focused on a homeless man in the area who roughly matched the sketch. But he was ruled out. Another man confessed while in custody for other crimes, but his story fell apart under scrutiny. In 2010, advances in forensic science allowed investigators to retest evidence. But again, nothing definitive was found. The file thickened with reports, but no suspect was ever charged. In 2020, the case briefly returned to headlines when authorities considered possible links to Christian Bruckner, the man later named as the main suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. Bruckner had lived in Germany during the late 1990s and had a record of sexual violence. For a time, investigators examined whether he could have been connected to Tristan's murder, but no evidence was found to tie him to the case. The tunnel where Tristan was murdered was eventually closed and sealed with concrete. The city hoped to bury the horror, but for many, that place still exists in memory. A dark underpass that swallowed a child in broad daylight. Tristan's father never received the answers he needed. He lived with the grief until his own death in 2014, still believing that someone out there knew the truth. And so, the case remains unsolved. For people in Frankfurt, the story of Tristan Brübach lingers, not just because of its brutality, but because of its contradictions. A child was murdered in a public place. Witnesses saw the suspect. A sketch was distributed worldwide. What happened to Tristan still haunts this city. And those who've stayed to listen. Thank you for staying with me today. If you're as drawn to these mysteries as I am, you might want to subscribe. I've got more stories coming that you won't believe existed. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant.